what I'm doing today is making a little secret door using one of these lids from a packet of baby wipes. I sanded it first and then painted it with black acrylic. It's best to use Paper Artsy's fresco paint little black dress when painting on metal or plastic like this. It sticks better than ordinary acrylic. I cut myself a piece of balsa wood slightly larger than the baby white lid in order to give some height so that I can put something in here in the hollow, like a key or a little bottle. In the meantime, I'll get on with decorating this. I've used a piece of netting which is made from string and stiffened. I'm not sure what it's for. I just saw it in the cheap shop in Tiptree and thought I'd got to have some of that, because it's nice and wiggly. It's not regimented like sequin waste, which as you can see is much more regular. And I wanted something more random, so I put this down on here, and while held in place I've scraped modelling paste over the top with a palette knife. You can also use grunge paste from Paper Artsy. To that I add a little sparkle using the iridescent medium from Winsor & Newton. Mix that in with the colour into the modelling paste. Over the top, once dry, I've used a piece of cloth because I got some rusting powder which I was just dying to try out, and that's what's on here. You can either paint a ragged line using Mod Podge or other paintable glue, or you could use Versamark and a stamp and then sprinkle the rusting powder over that as you would with embossing powder, and spritz it with water or white vinegar, and that will cause the iron filings and the rusting powder to begin to rust. I then use this piece of netting. It's shading from a greenhouse, and I scrape Mod Podge or modelling paste through that, and that's the white area you can see here. Greenhouse shading is available from any garden centre, but any type of netting will do. It's slightly random and not very neat, which is exactly what I'm looking for. I'll then paint this with black acrylic, because I can then use things like this metallic gilding wax. This is autumn bronze, and these are the most fabulous things. I just love them to bits. You rub it over with any kind of texture, the high points of which will pick up the colour. I also want to use some cogs, so because I don't own a cutting machine or an embossing machine, I've been to a craft crop where I was very kindly allowed to use the machine belonging to the lady running the crop, and I cut myself out loads of these cogs from these dies I got. I know, daft to buy dies when I don't have a machine, but it's worked out so far. I just couldn't resist these. I've also got an embossing folder from Darice, and the cogs are from Die Cut. I love cogs and SteamPunk. I was able to do a lot of embossing and they came out quite well, and here's one cut into 3 pieces, discard 2, and that's what I'm using probably on the top of here. I'll probably do the same thing with the gilding wax, picking out the high points. This is a handle. It's just a seal from the bottom of an ink cartridge for a Canon printer. You can use anything in craft. And I've got some little brags from Artemio. Yes, these are the little brads. They're by Artemio, and they're quite delicate. Some of them have rather nice patterns on them. But instead of just using them, what I've done, seeing as I don't have a lot of money, I've made little moulds using Easy Mould. I can do 2 in each of these. And using Super Sculpey, I've made lots of them, so that I now have lots of copies of these nice little things, and I could use them as rivets along the front, but my idea at the moment is to use one on the centre of that handle, or it will when I've stuck it down. You can see that this handle has already had some of the gilding wax put on it, and I think I'll be doing the same with the copy of the bread. I used autumn bronze and I think patina, yes, patina, which is a nice verdigris sort of green, both by Creative Expressions, like this one, see? When you put gilding wax on this little brad, it will help bring out the details. After that I will be placing this onto its housing, and then the whole thing goes on a background. I'm just not entirely sure what that background will be just yet. Okay, I've decided to use black acrylic, simply because this is the best background for using gilding waxes, or at least for using the colours that I want to use. You could paint it in a minty green, and then use a copper gilding wax to pick up the highlights. That would be quite good. I might go over the cloth with black acrylic and help it blend in better with the rest of it, and I'm not at all sure about the brown, but I'll leave that for the moment. I can always go over it afterwards. Now I have absolutely no idea how this is going to work. What I've done is I've used a little bit of black lava texture gel from Winsor & Newton's Galeria range, and from the same range, iridescent medium. To these two I have added a little bit of eggplant, which is one of Paper Artsy's fresco paints, about half as much of this as of the other two, and I've mixed them together in a little pot. And I'm now going to have a go at scraping some on through this mesh. This is bigger mesh than the other one that you can see just in shot, but they're both greenhouse shading materials, and I'm going to scrape this purple stuff partly over the black that I've already got on this little door. Here we go. No idea what this stuff is going to be like, never used any of this before except the eggplant fresco paint. This is where we find out if it works. Excuse me going slightly off camera. I'm going to use all of this up because I'm not sure that it's going to keep in this weather, and certainly not in this little pot I've got it in, which hasn't got a very tight fitting lid. Oops, I think that's now slipped. But it doesn't really matter because I don't want anything too straight anyway. You can push meshes into paste to make an impression. It's more mixing the mediums and the acrylic paint that concerns me. There we go. Ooh, it's not bad. Definitely got something going on there. There's a definite impression even over the previous paste. And it's lifting the rest of it as well. I'm quite pleased with that. Right, I'm now going to go and wash everything. Right, now then. I wasn't happy with the colour of this area of the piece. It was originally this colour, and it's got a nice sparkle in it, but I didn't really like it when it went with everything else on the piece. It didn't go with this purple, and it didn't go with the black. And the cloth was too obvious as it was. So I've gone over all this with, I think it's Deep Teal from Inscribe. By the way, try not to be tempted to speed things up in the drying of this by using a heat gun. This door is made of plastic, and if you try that, it will probably melt. And I wanted it slightly sparkly, so I added some iridescent medium. This is from Winsor & Newton's Galeria range. It's the same stuff as I used when I was mixing up the paint for the purple area. I then let it dry, but it doesn't take long to dry anyway. It's now much more integrated looking, with everything going together much better. I've also gone over the black area with a dry brush to get some of the same colour over there, picking up some of the high points, although this may end up being obliterated by something else later on. Right, so putting that aside for the moment, I'm now going to paint this die cut of the cogs with black acrylic, because this is going over the top of the little door, and when I've finished I'll come back to you with the next step. Now that the black has dried, I'm using a little bit of raw umber from Rowney's Kryler Flow Artist Acrylic Colours, but you can use any acrylic. The colour is the important thing, raw umber. And what you do is you get a little bit of this, I'm using kitchen roll here, dab some paint off on the tissue and go into some of the areas with an almost dry brush. You won't see a great deal of an effect from this on video. It's a subtle colour on black, but it helps the transition to the next colour. Let's zoom in a bit. I'm doing both of these pieces. This is the one I was working on earlier, and this other thinner piece has been taken from the same original sheet. Here we go. You don't want to put it everywhere, you need to leave some of the black, so just in some areas. I'll do this to both pieces, then let it dry, or you could speed things up with a heat gun. Now in this weather, I'm finding that this is drying quite quickly, but it will depend on where you are, your temperature and humidity, etc. But when the raw umber is dry, you do the same thing again, only more sparingly, using this colour, which is burnt sienna. Okay? Now this colour is much more obvious on these cogs, so be a little more sparing. The point is, what you're adding is rust. So you just want a little bit here and there in certain areas. Not a lot, which is why you've got the tissue to take some of it off. So the best thing is to think about the areas that are likely to get more rust because they're not working so much. Or of course maybe your cogs haven't worked for a long time, in which case you can put the rust wherever you like. Now I'm also working to a colour scheme in blues and purples, so when I've finished adding this brown I may add some purple as well. It's why I've got two pieces here, so I can try it out. Also the smaller piece reveals more of the background than the other one. You see? Lay this one down and you see more of the background than you do with the wider piece. By the way, using purple is not incompatible with the idea of rust. I've taken thousands of pictures of rust over many years, and you sometimes see rust that actually has rainbow colours in blues, purples, reds, all sorts of ranges, so purple is perfectly fine. I'm trying to add a little bit on each cog, trying to do it patchily, so it looks more as if the moisture in the atmosphere has attacked this machine than as if someone's gone round and painted every single tooth. Make it a little bit heavier here and there, but don't go nuts. A little bit more on this top piece like that, and then I will go on and do this second one, but I won't make you watch that. Now I'm going over one of these with Eggplant, the purple fresco paint from Paper Artsy, in the same way as I've already done with the raw umber and burnt sienna. But I'm just touching near where the other rust is, trying to make it look as if near the edges it's turning purple. It doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to think how it would appear if the rust was forming on the metal. And I'm using the Eggplant paint so that it ties in with the rest of the project. As I say, I've loved rust for a very long time, and sometimes it's as colourful as the patterns you get with petrol on the water in a puddle. So it doesn't have to be just this one colour, or just the burnt sienna. You can use whatever colours you like, as you can see from these photos of rust. Now I'm not going to go overboard with this, because I'm probably going to go overboard with something else later on. I decided to go over this other one with some of the Eggplant as well, because it's quite a dark colour and you don't see it immediately. It blends in quite well, but I won't make you watch any more of that. Starting with a piece of grey board 12 by 9 inches, cut it in half and stick the two pieces together. In order to do that, I'm going to cover both pieces with Mod Podge. Paint the Mod Podge all over, a decent coat, and do it over a craft mat, because it's much easier to wipe it off there than it is to try and clean your best table. Right, I've sandwiched together those two pieces because I could only get thin grey board. If you can get thicker stuff, go right ahead and use that instead. Now I'm painting Mod Podge over the top surface of the two pieces. Leave it to dry, then paint the other surface and let that dry too. The next step is to cut some more pieces of grey board into different sizes and shapes, and then cut them how you like. For instance, I've cut some of these with holes in, using a fairly large hole punch like this. And then using a medium-sized hole punch. It doesn't matter what kind of punch you use, I just happened to have these plier type punches. Once you've cut different sized holes out of your pieces of grey board, I suggest you save the pieces. That's what I've done, and with the pieces I put some of them on other bits of grey board, so that I now have depressions in grey board and protrusions on grey board. You can chamfer the ends of the grey board pieces as if you were making a tag, like I've done here, or you can round off the edges for a smoother effect. Another thing you can do, I went to Homebase, a local DIY store, and went completely nuts and got lots of different sized washers, nuts and bolts, screw cup washers and stuff like that. The screw cup washers are meant as decorative features when using screws on furniture where the screws will show. But I thought it was a lovely shape because you've got that protruding side, and if you turn it over you've got this sort of dippy side. Lovely stuff. You want things that have depth and height and a variety of shapes, and you can use these, which are upholstery nails, You can get decorative ones. I've had nice decorative ones before, but these are just plain ones, which is fine for this purpose. Now get a pair of pliers and snip the pin at the back of the nail, like this. Now that little proud bit of the nail that's left will help secure this to the board. Beg, borrow or steal a Brador from your husband's toolbox if you have one, or you can use one of these dental pick things that we crafters use as a pokey tool. I use mine for unclogging spouts of glue bottles and poking out bits of cardstock when I'm die cutting. Make a hole with a Brador, or whatever you've got, and with a blob of glue the proud bit of the nail will sit nicely in the hole secured by the glue. These upholstery nails have a rather nice finish. They call it bronze. So you could use these on top as well as underneath. You get lots in a packet, so you could use both. Now this is the stuff that's going to transform everything. It's tinfoil. Crumpled tinfoil. What you do is you cut yourself a piece of tinfoil double the size of this, so it will cover both the front and the back. But you crumple it carefully. I've already done this one, but to show you, here's how. You crumple it in such a way that it's easy to uncrumple it without tearing it. So fairly loosely, not into a tight ball. If it's not crumpled enough the first time, just crumple it again in a slightly different direction. Once I've got everything set on the board and glued down in the positions I want them to be in, I'll cover everything in Mod Podge. Then as quickly as you can before the Mod Podge is all dried up, push the tinfoil into all the depressions and mould it around the protrusions. Now a finger is a good thing for this, or I've found those little Pergamo tools are quite handy to use, the ones with the balls on the end. You have to work fairly quickly with this. Press and rub the tinfoil into all the crevices. Smooth it round the nuts, upholstery nails, washers, and the bits of grey board with depressions and protrusions. The highest items may cause the foil to split. If this happens and it's noticeable, you can add another bit of tin foil to cover it, sticking it down with PVA glue. But some splits may not be noticeable, especially after you paint it with black acrylic. The mesh I've used comes up quite quickly under the foil. Some other areas may need a bit more work. Your finger is a good implement for doing this because you can feel what you're doing as you're doing it. If you feel the need to use a tool, then the tools for Pergamo with the ball at the tip can be useful, or a ballpoint pen or a paper stump. Don't forget you don't want to smooth the tinfoil too much on the flat areas because you want to keep the nice crinkle effect as much as possible. If you've made a cavity to raise up your door to enable you to put a bottle, key or some such thing inside, don't forget to smooth the tinfoil down into the cavity as well. It's rather like putting pastry into a flan tin without cracking it. Ease the tinfoil into and around everything. Before you cover the other side of your project, pierce through the holes you've made for your binding. For me, that is the 2 holes at the side where I will put the rings I'm using. These rings. For you, that may be lots more holes if you're using a Zutta Bind-It-All or other machine binder, or a few opposing holes if you're using string or wire. I'll zoom in to show you the indentations a bit better, although you probably can't see it too well because this is shiny. You can use an old pen, biro, modelling tool, almost anything can be used if it does what you want it to do. Here I am trying out the effect of a clay modelling tool. You can also use the handle of a tool, a brush, a clay modelling tool like I am, or a pen, anything that's round that you can use like a small rolling pin. You can still see the crinkle when you do that, so long as you don't do it too hard.